So one of our sponsors tonight, or partners, is Wilmot Horticultural Society. And I imagine many of the people attending do belong to a horticultural society. In most communities, there is one, and we're part of Ontario Horticultural Society or Association. And some of the programs, it will really vary from one group to another. We offer monthly meetings in person until COVID came. We have a big junior gardening program. And also we have Trees Wilmot that we started a tree planting program this year. And also we look after in our community, about 40 to 50 civic gardens. So, and especially if people don't have a garden and would love to garden, we're looking for more people to get your knees and fingernails dirty and join in to keep our gardens beautiful. The one thing I haven't got on this list, which actually Sean is, he's also a master gardener, and they're under the umbrella of Ontario Horticultural Association, and they take courses, have to have a minimum of a number of volunteer hours yearly, and they're usually available, often free or with an honorarium, to help your even individuals and societies, both as speakers, running programs, offering workshops. So please reach out to them. And Nith Valley Eco Boosters. This is a nonprofit, politically nonpartisan volunteer group in our two neighboring townships of Wilmot and Wellesley. And they're also a partner in Let's Tree Wilmot. And we do a number of workshops and that type of thing. And we've had big seminars. This is our the second remote one. So we've done droughts and downpours in the fall, food waste, warmer, wetter, and wilder. That was related to climate change and flooding and that. And I'm calling in New Hamburg presently, and we like floods big time here. Our river will go up 17 feet in that. So floods are the name of the game here in our area. And Beyond Crisis, which was an event focused on the climate. And we have to thank Future Ground Network for providing the webinar service, and they've given us lots of help in terms of even marketing and learning how to do it. And it turned out when we worked together the first time, they were new to all of this. So we all had our little fumbles and oops and everything that worked and didn't work, working it out together. So I'm happy to introduce Sean James. The first time I heard him was with Waterloo Region does free seminars in the spring, the naturescaping, and his first talk that I heard was on rain gardens, and I've listened to him at several other occasions. So I find Sean is basically at the front lines with getting into native plants, doing the rain gardens, anything here to help our environment, increase our biodiversity. And he's very passionate, really knowledgeable. And so I'm really happy that he was available tonight. And he can wax lyrical with all the Latin names. I show off here when I stay away from them, although I'm learning when you want to find out what's truly native, you need to look at those Latin names. So, Sean, the platform is yours.
Okay, so here we go. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm pretty enthusiastic about plants in general, and I'm really enthusiastic about native plants. And we're going to talk about some of the more cool things that are out there, some of which you will know, some of which might be surprises, and maybe some of the information that we'll pass on will be new and exciting. I think a lot about the eco niche that plants provide and what they're going to do for the birds and the bees and the butterflies and the whole enchilada. And I think one of the things that we really need to look at is pollinator support, and early and late is really important. There's a lot of things in the summer, not that any season deserves to be ignored, but there's a lot of things in the summer, but early and late is really important. And it might lead us to plant some things that we might not have thought of otherwise. So pussy willows actually are really good for pollinators in early spring. When there's still snow on the ground, there are anthers and pollen on them. And I've seen on a warm day, they'll be up and about. And some of these creatures also, well, creatures being the plants in this case, there are caterpillars and such that feed on the plants that then the birds and such can feed on. So if you see a little icon of a bird, then you'll know that it's good for the birds. If you see a little icon of a raindrop, a lot of what I do is about rain gardens. So these are plants that are also suitable for rain gardens. And you won't see the exclamation point I use for invasive species, and you won't see a Canadian flag because they're all Canadian. So here we go. I love, and I think massively underrated, is plain old red maple. And when I say red maple, I'm not talking about the Crimson King maple. I'm talking about the Leafs Jersey maple that has red fall color. But I love the flowers on them. And again, out long before anything else is out. And you can see in this picture, I love the fly that's looking at us in this picture here, and lots of different bees. I was sitting on a friend's porch and I didn't really notice. I was noticing the tree, and all of a sudden the wind kicked up and this cloud kind of went, oh, and all these pollinators were blown off it and then flew back onto it. So I popped over and took some pictures because that really fascinated me. And of course, it's got great fall color, and it has nice foliage all year, and it stands clay soil. It would like a little more moisture. I've seen ones that are picky about acidity, and I've seen others that aren't. So there's a lot to be said for ecotypes as well. So an ecotype is a strain of a plant that grows in this particular place. So you might have the same species all over a mountain, but the ones that are higher on the mountain are more cold tolerant, and the ones that are lower are less cold tolerant. A genus that's grown up in a wet area is going to be more tolerant of flooding and less tolerant of drought. So picking plants that are directly local to you, the seed stock, the genome is directly local to you, can be very important and certainly worth thinking about. So we talked about early. What about late? I love this plant. The coolest thing about this plant, this is witch hazel, and witch hazel unblooms. So in the fall, these little fists open up on a nice sunny day, and then on a cold, crummy, rainy day, they curl back up again. It blooms and unblooms, which is pretty nifty. And it's just really cool to have something blooming at that time of year. It has bold texture, which we lack a little bit of in our Canadian native plant spectrum. And also tolerant of very thin soils and incredible drought. As you're out walking about, keep your eyes peeled for what plants are doing what when. And you might be surprised if you go to a place in Dundas called Webster's Falls, there's that much soil, and yet certain serviceberries, Amelanchier arborea, witch hazels, chinkapin oaks are doing really well there. So these things stick in my brain that when I'm dealing with these situations, there's a perfect plant. There's a perfect plant for every place, and native plants are more, I find, more broadly tolerant than a lot of other species. So you can really pick a problem-solving plant if you're looking at the native species. Again, pollinator support, but beyond that, just cool plants. And this plant here, this is Ironweed. And I was at Lost Horizons. Sidebar, I think we really need to support the crazy little garden centers run by crazy little gardeners, because we need them. If they go and they're dropping like pollinators, if they go, then the box stores will only need to sell boxwood. We really need to support the small garden centers, because I was walking around at Lost Horizons and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. Larry, what's that? And this was this plant that's 7 feet tall that arched up over the pathway. Beautiful magenta flowers, lovely leaves, fed upon by all sorts of creatures. Really, really worth having in your garden. And there's lots of different ironweeds too, different sizes and shapes and so on, but all with these lovely magenta flowers. And also, yep, that's got a little raindrop. Good for rain gardens as well. I think a lot about what feeds what caterpillars. I was speaking earlier today at a design conference, mostly about how we should know our plants better. And I said, you'll all be horrified to know that I've been using African violets, excuse me, in my designs. And you saw people's eyes get wide, or not African violets in my designs. The reason being is, first of all, we want ground covers to cover the ground. So violets are perfect. Secondly, they're fed upon by the great spangled fritillary, a beautiful big orange butterfly, all fritillaries actually. So they're an obligate feeder. They have to feed on this plant. A spectacular butterfly called a Baltimore checker spot feeds on our native turtlehead, which also deserves a little raindrop. And New Jersey tea is food for the critically endangered mottled dusky wing butterfly. So you can be doing some real good when you do this as well as having beauty. And I really believe that nothing needs to be a sacrifice. You don't have to give anything up to do good if you just pick the right plants. And of course, milkweed for monarchs, we know this one. So lots of opportunities there. I get a kick out of it. So I design and I oversee the installation. I do a little bit of installation myself of various landscapes. And sometimes the reactions are pretty funny because I'll put a plant in like gorgeous, pearly, everlasting, salt tolerant, sun tolerant, clay tolerant, sand tolerant. And then I get calls in August that there's a butterfly eating my plants or a caterpillar. Yes, that's why we planted it. Oh, right. But they're eating it. Okay, it'll come back. And if it doesn't, I'll get you another one. And once it's established, it'll come back. We want these things to be eaten. I planted milkweed in one lady's place, and she called me that there were fuzzy black and orange and yellow, black and orange and white caterpillars eating her plant. I said, that's a milkweed tiger moth, and they're okay. We're not just aiming to help monarchs. So, you know, we holes in leaves are good, as Martin Galloway once said. And I didn't really get that until something was eating my willow tree. And I had 7 different species of birds at one time feeding on the willow tree because they were there feeding on the grubs. So I love this slide. I was speaking to a group of grade 6 kids, and I said, "Who knows what this is?" And they went, "It's a bee." Well, no, it's not a bee. It's a wasp. Okay, it doesn't sting. How's that for a hint? That really perplexed them. And then they went back to, "It's a bee." Not only were they fascinated by the fact that it's a fly that mimics bees, but that it's a great predator. So the more we can support biodiversity in our gardens, it's not about this or that. There's no one big lever to pull on. There's lots of little levers. And if we push on this one a little bit and pull on that one, then everything does well. So supporting things like hoverflies and everything else through the plants that we choose is a much better way to go. And incidentally, great winter interest as well. I love buttonbush. Again, big leaves, fairly broadly tolerant. These cool little Sputnik flowers in midsummer. Bees go gaga over them. It's a good rain garden plant. It's an unusual plant. It has nice yellow fall color, maybe with a touch of gold to it. But this is a plant that I think deserves more use in our gardens. It's a medium-sized shrub, but it's a really cool plant to have in the garden. And it also has some decent winter interest from the seed heads, which is something that you may have noticed we need to think a lot more about in our gardens. When we live in a country that has winter for 6 months of the year, think about what the winter looks like. And for heaven's sakes, I know I don't need to tell you this, preaching to the choir, but don't clean up your garden in the fall. Wait until springtime to do that sort of jazz. It's much better. This is becoming generally available as plants go. I can buy, I deal, because I'm a landscaper, I get to buy stuff wholesale. And I've seen it in the wholesale nurseries. Most garden centers that Joe and Josephine Citizen would buy from, they are buying from the big wholesale nurseries. They're not growing the stuff themselves. So be persistent. They're making multiple trips to the nursery per season. So say, hey, here's a plant. I've written the name down for you and everything. Give them the botanical name so that there can be no confusion. Doesn't take much to research that jazz. And that way, the next time that they're going, they can put it on their list and get it for you. North American Native Plant Society has plant sales every year that have certain plants for sale. Sorry about that. I don't know if St. Williams is still offering. By the way, we will, at the end, there's a bunch of slides and those PDFs will be sent out that have a list of all the different native plant nurseries. And honestly, things come and go from stock when you're dealing with native plants, because as wonderful as they are in the garden, they're a bit tricky to grow in the garden, in the nurseries. Some of them are a bit finicky to get them to germinate and so on. But we're going to give you a list of all the plants of all the nurseries that I'm aware of, and then you can add on to that as well. Whoops, there we go. Staghorn sumac, I think, is a lovely plant in the right place. It may need a little control in the garden because it can get carried away. I've started using them in planters, like big raised plexiglass or fiberglass planters, plexiglass. And I like them. Now, I was going to talk about this later, but maybe I should talk about it now. There's a lot of debate in the world about nativars, and nativars are cultivars of native plants. And I think it's a reasonably solid statement that the true native, like just as it's found in the wild, is going to be the better plant for biodiversity. There are some exceptions. There are studies being done, and we're really just new at this. But I'm also someone who sells landscapes, and I think about the saleability of certain things. And if I can get someone to plant a golden cut-leafed sumac, in the case of tiger's eye, and I know I wouldn't get them to plant a regular sumac, then as long as it's filling some of the eco niche, that's a reason to plant it. If I can get people to plant the pure native, I will certainly educate them to do so. But I think both have a place in our gardens. If we can go pure genetic local, that's the best of all worlds. And that's for a lot of people. And more every year are leaning this way. We're seeing the beauty that is subtle in the world around us. We're needing less of the kaboom, the fireworks every year, and more of what's in our backyard. And we're becoming more and more aware of the great good that we can do. Certainly, nativars are still for sale, and they probably always will be. But if you can stick with the native species, you're going to do more good in the landscape. You're going to support more biodiversity. In fact, I think I've only once seen tiger's eye here bloom, and yet the species blooms on a fairly regular basis. Although I think there are male and female varieties. Not positive about that. I have not had a moose walk through my garden and eat my sumacs yet. And you can make tea from them; they're delicious. Black chokeberry. Some of these plants really need a good marketing agent. Chokeberry is a horrible name, but it's a lovely plant. And I'm forever trying to guide people away from things like burning bush, because burning bush is invasive. I pulled out 200 on one job site, and I know another friend who pulled out 150 on Sheldon Creek in Burlington. And yet it does one thing, and it doesn't even do it all that well. Most burning bushes just sort of smolder. But this black chokeberry has this spectacular, complex fall color. It's got white flowers in the spring. It's got blackberries in the summertime that persist, sort of late summer, that persist deep into the winter. They're not very good. In fact, they suck all the moisture out of you, but the birds will eat them late in the season, so that's especially valuable for them. It's late season food, so that's worth thinking about. But a wonderful, wonderful plant, and I think another underrated plant in the landscape. Now, beware, some of these plants haven't been trained very well, and they may not play well with others. These guys run a little bit, but that's okay. Putting it in the right place is the right thing to do. And if anybody wants to make me some choke cherry jelly, I'm down to try it. They keep changing the names on these things. So Potentilla is now called Dasiphora, although the common name is now Potentilla. We no longer call it five-leaf cinquefoil, so who knows? And Liatris is a lovely plant. These are both great rain garden plants. We fell out of love with Potentilla because we overused it, because it's such a great plant. But it's coming back, and I think this is a really wonderful plant that stands spring flooding and summer drought, or all the time drought, pretty much any soil you want to throw at it. Same with Liatris. They're both very similar, and you look at that color combination, it's really sharp together. I like that. Definitely deserving of more use in the landscape, and very good for pollinators as well. I don't know about birds on that one. Now, some of you, I thought about take this out, leave this in. I'm in the profession. This is what I do. And I was speaking in London, and it's a testament to how far natives have come and the awareness of them. I did not know that aronia was medicinal. That's cool. In our industry, they had me come and talk at a chapter group in London, and they said, "How do you sell natives to people who don't want them?" And I said, well, first of all, now many people want this sort of thing. And secondly, if they don't show interest, I don't tell them. I just give them native, and they're not going to be any the wiser because native plants are beautiful, and most people don't know what's native and what isn't. If I did a landscape for you that had a lot of Potentilla and Liatris in it, most people wouldn't know that those were native plants. So you can kind of sneak it in under the radar, just in case anybody out there is looking at selling or designing native landscapes. This is a neat plant that I think is underrated. I like the willows in general, but they really need the right place for a bunch of them. This is dwarf Arctic willow, and sadly we only see this at malls generally, where it gets globed to death by the landscape janitors. This is a lovely plant which has great foliage texture and color, and again, puts up with absolutely any conditions. You never see it in a rain garden, but it would make a great rain garden plant. It gets big, but if it gets too out of control, you can just cut it right back to the ground. Now, don't wimp out. If you're going to coppice a plant, do it in the spring, not short enough, not short enough, not short enough. Little circles when you're done, that's all, so that it's forced to come up through the ground, and then it will root. But that's a great plant for the landscape, and you can deal with the size. I mean, this will get, I mean, I've seen them very large, but generally speaking, 4 or 5 feet in the landscape. So I like this plant a lot, and it makes a nice foil because of that gray blue foliage. It makes a nice foil to some of the brighter colors. Like that would look beautiful against Liatris, for instance. This is one of my favorite shrubs, and it's so underrated. Does nothing all year. Wouldn't even know it's there. But when everything falls off, everything else, these berries are revealed all winter long. Sparkleberry, winterberry, Ilex verticillata. How bulletproof is this plant? I've seen it growing in McDonald's gardens. And I think that's sort of the baseline for tough garden situations. But really nice plant, all winter long. And the birds do eat the berries late in the winter. I actually watched them in Gage Park in Hamilton last year, just at the beginning of the lockdown, eating berries off this. So definitely a worthwhile plant to have in your landscape for many reasons, and superb for the rain garden as well. But it doesn't need a rain garden. Being a holly though, you need 1 male for every 5 females if you're going to get good berry production. You can't just have one or the other and get berries. I love my milkweeds. I have, I think, 7 different species of milkweed in my garden, assuming that my poke milkweed seeds germinate. This is a plant that has so much interest. It depends on the species that you're looking at. Some of them have little thin leaves like Asclepias verticillata, whorled milkweed. Some of them have great big honking giant leaves like the common milkweed. Some are great for rain gardens. Others like butterfly milkweed are great for scree gardens and super dry places. Now, mind you, each of them sort of has a place and a purpose. Poke milkweed grows in the shade, but the other ones will not. Swamp milkweed grows pretty much anywhere, but only it will grow in a rain garden or in a wetland. Perfect by the edge of an ornamental pond. And all of them are food for monarch caterpillars, and all of them have edible flowers. I leave lots for the pollinators, but I have been known to eat the flowers and the seed pods. And they're so fragrant, especially species straight milkweed. It just, common milkweed just wafts through the garden, and I ache for it when it's in bloom. What a beautiful, beautiful plant. If we put a plant like this particular Monarda in a regular garden with its super lush soil and all its mulch and so on, it's going to take over the world. But if you put it in that challenging soil where you have trouble growing anything else, Monarda fistulosa will be very well behaved and have your garden just loaded with butterflies and so on. So this is a good plant. It's relative. And if you want to know where a plant's native to, if you put the botanical name into Google and then tack the letters USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, on the end of it, you'll get maps of where things are native to. In the States, if you zoom in, you'll see what county they're from. In Canada, it shows, yeah, it's in Ontario, but I'll take it. It tells me that it's native here, which gives me the latitude to use it. This is a more behaved variety of Beebalm. This guy here, as I say, in a regular garden, tends to run a bit. But if you've got dry condition, if you've got heavy clay, this is a perfect plant. And you look, there's just all sorts of creatures that feed on them, and you even get things like clearwing sphinx moths, which are really, really nifty. I like that idea of calling milkweed Monarch's Delight. I really do believe that some of these plants need a good marketing agent. And speaking of which, poor old goldenrod. So many people think that goldenrod causes allergies, and I see why. It's on the pill bottles for allergy medication, for heaven's sakes. If you look it up online, if you look up ragweed, you see goldenrod. And yet there are some great goldenrods. I wouldn't, I mean, I have Canada goldenrod in my garden, but it's not something I would put in a customer's garden, put it that way. But Solidaria rugosa, wrinkle-leafed goldenrod, stiff goldenrod, gray goldenrod, early goldenrod, zigzag goldenrod. That's one that's great for dry shade. Anything that blooms in September, October, has bold texture, beautiful golden flowers, is great for pollinators, is medicinal. That's a heck of a checklist. So even if it did cause allergies, I wouldn't care, but it's a wonderful plant that does not cause allergies. Spherical, wind-borne, pollen grain can't cause allergies. And you can use the hearts long before they bloom. The cone of leaves is really tasty. I've used them in, actually, no, I haven't used them. I've had them in a sauté with wild freshwater mussels, actually. And the other guy that's in that picture is sneezeweed. Again, doesn't cause allergies, but gorgeous, gorgeous plants. And they look sharp together, and they're both good rain garden plants, but neither of them needs to be in a rain garden. So that's worth mentioning as well. Some beautiful native shrubs that are worth looking at. We've got things like Eastern redbud, which has such a lovely early spring flower. Again, weirdly edible flowers. One of the first plants to bloom, one of the first trees to bloom, and therefore really good for pollinator support. Speaking of nativars, the nativars of this are terrible. Most of them are not at all tolerant of our conditions here. I don't know where the ecotype is. I don't know where the genome is from that they use to make all the fancy ones. But just the straight Eastern redbud is a lovely, lovely tree. Back to the debate about nine barks. I'm of two minds. There are some lovely foliage colors for nine barks. So if you, as an artist, if you need something to go with that color, the options there. One of the big problems with them is that some of them are huge. So make sure, as always, make sure you're putting the right plant in the right place. The straight species, this is an example where the straight species is pretty darn beautiful. It's got spring flowers, it's got neat, nifty seed heads, and therefore winter interest. It's got decent fall color. It's a good plant for riverbank restoration, for rain gardens, and even in the regular garden. If it's lean soil or challenging soil, shall we say, this is a plant that stays nice and compact as well. A really smart plant to have in your garden. Now, one of my favorite plants, which I really wish would catch hold more, is gray dogwood. You talk about, again, back to the burning bush rant. I rant. You talk about the burning bush, and people buy it for that fall color, that kaboom for maybe 2 weeks if you're lucky. Here's a plant that has beautiful flowers in the spring. It's got nice leaves all summer long. It's got spectacular fall color. It's got these white berries that the birds like. They don't taste like anything, so they taste like water, so don't try eating them. They won't hurt you. And then when all the berries fall off and then all the leaves fall off, those umbels that hold, I guess it's a raceme, that hold the berries remain on the plant well into February. So you get this sort of haze of pink over the whole plant. It's interesting that eating native plants and so on, I'm very cautious about. It requires a fair bit of education. And I tend to think that we harvest more than we should, generally speaking. We got this, 10% rule. But if you go into the woods and you see a patch of wild leeks and you take 10%, the person who comes after you doesn't know what you took. And before you know it, there's only one plant left. I'd rather we maybe harvested 10% of the seed and then grew it in our own gardens. I think that would be a much better way to do things. So just things to ponder. But really a great plant that deserves more use in our landscapes. It does run, but I haven't found it to be a problem in my garden. Worst case scenario, I dig some up and give them to my friends. A relative of it is Cornus, I just love saying Cornus amomum, blueberries, and a little smaller, again, great for rain gardens, and great fall color. I like all dogwoods, let's face it, but this one's really, really cool. And those berries just look like little blue pearls. I really like this plant. Neither of these does terribly well in shade. They'll grow in shade, but you won't get the berries, you won't get the flowers as well, and you certainly won't get the fall color. You want good fall color, generally put things out in the sun. Now, there are exceptions to that. And the world is changing pretty fast. This is a plant that's becoming available now. This is maple-leafed viburnum. And it has nice white flowers. It has blackberries that the birds like, but it is extremely shade tolerant, and it does very well as far as coloring up goes in the shade. There are some lovely viburnums that are finally becoming more available. This is finally becoming available. Ontario Native Plants is starting to grow it. They're an online service. They sell plants online and deliver them, and I'm a fan. This is nannyberry. Now, there's some confusion about the name of nannyberry, and I haven't quite narrowed it down. Some people are saying that Viburnum nudum, others Viburnum cassinoides, Viburnum nudum variety cassinoides. I don't think that the nomenclature has gelled, shall we say, on this plant, and I don't care what we call it. Our native nannyberry has lovely fall color. Again, white flowers in the spring. Look at what these berries do. These berries change color until they're all black, but sometimes they start white and then pink and then black. This particular one is not necessarily what it looks like right here. I took these in Nova Scotia where I was completely enchanted with the plant. But oh wow, they're delicious. And the birds think so too. And people say, well, how do you get service berries off your service berry? Well, I have enough food in my garden that both the birds and I can eat and do well with them. Someone's asking about cleaning up. I would say mid to late May, once things have woken up. They say when the air temperature is around 15 degrees, but definitely spring, definitely not fall. Viburnum, maple leaf viburnum is a little bit susceptible to the the viburnum beetle. Thank you. That's a good question. Not as much in my experience as Viburnum trilobum. Sorry, I got stuck on. It looked like I could have played it off as if my screen was freezing there. Viburnum trilobum is our native high bush cranberry, and it gets absolutely ravaged by the viburnum leaf beetle. But it doesn't in the wild, which is interesting. I think a lot of it has to do with the biodiversity in your garden. There are still plants that you can't find in the trade. At least I haven't been able to find Viburnum alnifolium hobblebush. This is a plant that I thought was the best colored basswood that I've ever seen. And I finally noticed the buds are like praying hands. Beautiful texture. Fuzzy leaves. Doesn't get the leaf beetle as a result. But great fall color and big white flowers in the spring as well. This is a woodland, wetland, shade tolerant viburnum. And really, if you can find it, and if you can get just the right place for it to grow, it doesn't like hot summers and it doesn't transplant well. So I need to find someone growing it from seed. If anyone's wondering, that aster in the picture, that's actually what made me stop on the side of the road. That's Aster puniceus, or swamp aster. There we go. So everybody asked me about plants for shade. And this is one of my favorites. When I was a little kid, this was one of my favorites. This is flowering raspberry. This is Rubus odoratus. I've misspelled that. Spelling is not my strong suit. It's odoratus, but a good plant for the birds. Great bold texture. Again, I would put this in a challenged site. If you put this in a lush irrigated garden, then it will want to take over the world. It's a little bit Napoleonic that way. But in a challenge situation where you can't grow other things in the shade, this is your plant. It's a super good plant for shade gardens, as is Solomon seal. And there are different species of Solomon seal out there, native and non-native. Some of them have beautiful fall color. And I'm a little fuzzy on which is which. I can't necessarily tell Polygonetum biflorum from Polygonetum multiflorum and so on. There's a bunch of different ones out there, and there seems to be some flux in the naming of them. But hummingbirds love them. You can eat the new shoots, take off the leaves, but you eat them like asparagus shoots, little teriyaki sauce, and lovely architecture. The shape and form of this plant in the garden is spectacular. I have found it challenging to make a meadow look good. It requires a little bit of finesse, a little bit of fine tuning, a little bit of time. In fact, this particular shot, the Ken of the thistles and non-native weeds took over entirely. There's still a lot of Queen Anne's lace in there, but we ultimately did fairly well. And the trick was, I was getting frustrated, so we got a load of egg gravel, just gravel that's under the road, the sand all the way up to chunks this big, and we put about 2 inches over the whole thing. And all the non-natives went, "Oh, I don't like this at all," and the natives went, "What are you talking about? This is fine. We're used to this," and they thrived. And I'm very proud of this. And the customer asked for this. She wanted a wildflower meadow, and she hates it. She was thinking of something more stylized, and yet this is what we ended up with. I love it. By the end of the season, I have her jazzed up again because I'll be going on, "Look at all the butterflies. This is so cool." Yeah. I don't know. I like it, and that's all that counts in this particular instance. So if you have, everybody talks to me about lowering their maintenance. If you have a fair bit of lawn, then this is a good way to go. This is a good way to reduce your lawn use, and do a lot of good and sequester a whole bunch of carbon, because meadows are great. Tallgrass prairies, shortgrass prairies, wildflower meadows are brilliant at sequestering carbon. I really think that you don't have to give up anything. These folks came to me living in Toronto, in the hoity-toity section of Toronto, Boxwood City, and they wanted to remove all the grass. They had pure sand soil. They wanted an English cottage garden, all with native plants. I was like, check. Yeah, I could do that. Okay, no problem. You want an English cottage garden on sand soil with all native plants? And I had to hit the books, and that's okay. It's okay to need and want to learn. That's all right. This is what we ended up with. But the thing about native plants and the thing about drought tolerant plants is that they need a little more care for the first while, for the first year, really. It's not going to be instant. That's what you get. That's what it looked like when it was new. But then 3 years later, that's what it became. And not many people in the neighborhood have asked for this, but everybody in the neighborhood goes for walks and walks around it and likes to see the birds and the wildlife and so on. So I'll call that a win. Bit by bit. So another plant that we're starting to plant more is a bulletproof plant. This is hackberry. Again, somebody needs a marketing agent. Hackberry? Why would I want that in my garden? Does it have great fall color? No. Is it got pretty flowers? No. Fragrance? No. Edible fruit? Not for us. I mean, I think you can eat them. I don't know if they're any good, to be honest. But there are at least 2 obligate feeders for it. And I still haven't seen a snout butterfly. I'm dying to see a snout butterfly. But this summer I was working in, I did a beautiful multi-purpose eco garden in Bloomingdale. And I saw my first tawny emperor butterfly feeding there, which is really, really cool. And this plant will grow anywhere. This is a remarkable plant. I actually finally saw mature hackberry plants right along the Grand River, and they just blew my mind. And they were seeding freely into the properties around them because the birds take the seeds and pop them around. So this is definitely a plant that you should have in your garden. There's no one solution, right? I mentioned that before. Because this is such a good tree, don't fall victim to filling the world with them. We don't want to do all of our neighborhoods in this one tree. Variety equals resilience. Keep that in mind. We fell in love with ash trees because they were great for cities, but it didn't. It didn't endure through the emerald ash borer because we planted them everywhere. So we just made buffet for those creatures. Someone was asking about composting, and that's very important. I do composting, but I also do let it lay, where I clean up everything in the spring by cutting it down in 4-inch increments to about 6 inches tall. So all of those hollow stems become potential bee homes. And then I just leave it where it is. If I get a big pile somewhere, maybe from the grasses, I might spread it out more. But that seems to do more to support biodiversity and to support the soil microbiome over time than anything else did. I have some weird plants in my garden, like prickly ash, and I can't say it without saying "kiss my prickly ash." I'm sorry, I tried not to, but there it is. Xanthosxylum americanum, and there's a butterfly moving north that I first saw in Six Nations at Sweetgrass Gardens, Ken Parker's garden, and I was blown away. It's the largest temperate butterfly that we have, and well-tempered too, the giant swallowtail. And the caterpillar looks exactly like bird poop. And I planted this in my garden. I got some from a lady out in Puslinch. And we actually had, imagine the feeling the first time you see this great giant butterfly wafting through your garden, and you follow it around the corner, and sure enough, it's laying eggs on your prickly ash. It was wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And now we have them in our gardens as well. Yes, they do feed on hop trees as well. Someone's mentioning that in the chat, which is really, really cool. They also feed on other things in the citrus family, like rue, and one would assume citrus. In the States, they're potentially a pest, but here they're just magic, and certainly in our gardens. You know what? If the birds and the bees and the butterflies come and take some of what is for me, I'm totally cool with that. Some other trees that I think deserve more attention: birch trees, of course. Larch. I mean, larch, that's a forsythia tree. Why would you want a forsythia that hardly ever blooms in the spring when there's lots of other color, when you could have a larch that blooms when when everything's off the trees? The larch trees still have their needles on them, and they're that bright gold. I love my trembling aspen. I actually did $300 worth of pruning for the right to dig a trembling aspen from a local a friend's garden, and so that I could have it in my property. And I just love the way it moves through the different seasons. I think we need to focus more on grasses. Native grasses are great. I try and avoid things like miscanthus, especially this miscanthus. Miscanthus saccharophloris is a nasty invasive species. But big blue stem, little blue stem, switchgrass, sargastrum. There are so many great grasses and sedges as well. I love pagoda dogwoods. I love bayberry. Bayberry is everything tolerant. I saw it growing in salt on sandy soil on the north side of Nova Scotia, where the wind whips off the ocean and just nails them with salt. Birds like the berries. Really, really cool plant. Fragrant. Underrated. This is, I'm bouncing around from shrubs to perennials a little bit here, but this is our native hibiscus moschutos, swamp mallow, and really beautiful plant. I think I got that from Sweetgrass Gardens as well. I've been around for a while. There are nativars of this that are lovely as well, and I'm sure that there are creatures that eat their leaves, but planting the native that's a beautiful, beautiful plant. Blueberries, that's something I would do in pots, frankly. For starters, it beats the bunnies a little better. Pardon the alliteration. Secondly, I don't I don't recommend amending soil to make the plant that you want to grow there grow. But if you put acidic soil in a planter, then you can grow your blueberries in planters. And I actually get a fair number of blueberries in my garden by growing them in planters. And they're really, really hardy, so you don't have to worry about putting them up. You've all seen Doug Ptolemy's information about what plants feed what creatures. Um, if you could plant one tree, I would recommend that you planted an oak tree. Now, mind you, if everybody took that advice, that would sort of defeat the purpose. But oak trees are really, really good for biodiversity and birds, and I just love my birds. I think if you plant trees for a living, you're an optimist. So I've been planting pawpaws, and I'm hoping that one day I will get to see a zebra swallowtail. That's my little hidden agenda. Is I just love I've never seen one, and I lust the idea of seeing a zebra swallowtail. Maybe in good time. Keep in mind though that's a plant that runs. So little pictures, match the plant to the soil. Like I was saying with the blueberries, don't try and change nature. Try and match the plants that you're choosing to the soil that you have. And there's all kinds of stuff that loves growing in clay. There's all kinds of stuff that loves growing in sand. Look to nature for these keys as to what will grow where. This is pure sand soil down in Burlington. And that, I mean, it's a beautiful garden. It's almost too beautiful where we're having to take out some of the coneflowers. Sadly, that is not the locally native coneflower. It still does a lot of good for biodiversity, but it's not Echinacea pallida. It's in there somewhere. There's one little one I can see way back there. But it really is a good plant. There's other things we can do as well. Now, this is a sedum green roof. I would love to see green roofs, which do a lot of good, capture 95% of rainfall events and feed pollinators and all sorts of jazz. But why aren't we using some of our great alvar natives on this? Picdanthum, Virginia mountain mint, or nodding onion, for instance. They would be great green roof plants, and some of the funky grasses that we have as well. There's lots of things that we can do. Be forever learning and analyzing about what plants can grow where. Preaching to the choir here, I know this. Check out the Grow Me Instead guide or anything from the Ontario Invasive Plant Council, teaching people that there are other plants other than invasives that are good for your garden. People want to grow Crimson King maples because they like that red, but they don't realize that they're almost impossible to garden under, and they don't realize that they're invasive. But you could plant Nativars, you could plant a ruby lace honey locust, and it plays well with others. It actually fertilizes the plants around it. These, now I'm not going to go through all these individually, but these are some of the companies that I've found that sell native plants. There are many, and they come and go. In all fairness, this might already be out of date, but there are local groups that keep track of this information as well. So just a few places that you can think about, worth a little road trip here and there. I love questions. We will answer as many as we can tonight, but if you can't, if we don't get to your question tonight, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, you name it. You can check out my my website as well. I even have a YouTube channel that's I think it's worth looking at. But yeah, questions are good. If I know the answer, it makes me feel good. And if I don't know the answer, it makes me learn something which makes me feel good. So never hesitate to reach out on any of the various platforms. And I'm trying to share good information out there and get the word out. By the way, I mean, we don't have water coolers anymore, but don't sit quietly in the corner and wait for people to notice you. Don't be Canadian. Get out there and proselytize about these sort of things. Be enthusiastic about native plants, and try and show the world how awesome they are. I have a very wild English cottage on steroids garden, and I peek out my window and there's always people stopping. Sometimes they'll even walk through the garden, which they're more than welcome to do. And I've got little signs that tell people what a rain garden is and why milkweed is good. People stop and read the signs. We can make a difference. We are making a difference. The fact that there's like 600 people signed up for tonight's speech tells you that. You know, so don't be afraid. Ah, yes, that's a good idea. James Bond thought he was pretty cool because he had a camera that was bigger than this. Nowadays, we have this sort of Library of Alexandria in our pockets, and we've got a camera if you want to. That's an easy way to do this. Now, the PDF of this will be made available to those who want it. I'll let Marlene speak to that. But also the video is being recorded. I'm not sure how that's being made available. Northland, do they? You know, I'm a bad horticulturist. I still haven't been to Northland Nurseries. Everybody, you gotta go. But yes, I've been told that actually, that they've broadened their horizons as well. Under the cedar trees, oh, that's tricky. That's the cedar trees, it's less about shade and more about water. Yeah, actually, thank you for asking that question. What will grow under cedar trees? You're gonna have to water them for a year to get them established. I don't know if I actually finished that thought, but drought tolerant plants, and that includes shade, are going to take at least a year. I've seen Oregon grape holly, which used to be Mahonia aquifolium and now is Berberis aquifolium, and there's also a creeping one called repens, and they're native to Ontario. I'm not sure if they're native right down here. I've never actually seen them in the wild, but I've seen them growing in coniferous forests. Things like Gautharia as well, wintergreen, will do well in a situation like that. And some of the sedges like oak sedge, Carex pennsylvanica, should do decently there. A couple of the ferns too, if you can get them established. So Christmas fern, I just like showing off by saying Polysticum acrostichoides is a good example of that. There's something else that's ringing a bell, but I can't quite put my brain on it right now. There's a wonderful book by Lone Pines Press called Forest Plants of Central Ontario, and that may help you out quite a bit. I don't know how that company stays in business. They produce spectacular books that are really, really regional, and yet they're out there, and it's a really, really good book. So how are we doing questions, Steph?
Oh, you turned your audio off again, Steph.
There we are. You're on.
We have about 28 of them.
All right. Punch
so
it.
we want to go through. So we'll quickly go through some of them. Are rain garden plants also good for riparian borders?
Almost all of them would be. Riparian restoration means riverbank restoration. And almost all of the rain garden plants would be good in a riverbank situation as well. Yes, absolutely. If you're looking at the woody stuff, you may also have to beat the beavers. And most of that means actually wrapping them with hardware cloth, sort of chicken wire on steroids. But yes, the answer is a nice, simple yes.
Okay, the next one would be, I would like to grow sweetgrass in my garden. Where can I get either a clump or seeds?
Oh boy. There's a wonderful new nursery in Six Nations, and it doesn't pronounce like it spells, and I'm always terrified to pronounce it. It's spelled KNS, K-A, I can't even do it now. I believe it's pronounced KNS.
Oh.
What's that?
I'm gonna look up, I know of it and I've spoken to them, so I'll add that to our list of growers that I've generated.
Oh my gosh, yes, it wasn't on my list, was it? Goodness gracious.
Yes, and someone else would like to see that list pop up again while we're talking. If you can put the list up again, then we'll take a picture of it.
Sure, that will be sent out.
They will get all the lists, so if they want to just relax and listen, that's fine. So in the email, they're going to get the PDF of the presentation. I've got a handout. Oh, and then in this PDF is the list of, somebody there's got the name of the.
Yes, that just popped. I just put up the, good idea. I should have thought of putting the link. I just shared a screen with the place as well.
Yeah, and the link, this is going to be available for a week on YouTube. So you will be having a link sent to you for all of that. So there should be a lot more information than you probably want coming to you in a few days.
They're a really cool place. I reached out to them this year because I'm doing a butterfly garden down in Beamsville. And they sent me a really nifty list of plants as well. Like many native plant places, things are going to come up and down in and out of availability, depending on what they harvest, because they're harvesting and growing the seed. But this is a really, really nifty place.
And they're
Stop share.
online, yeah, they're online. And also just the heads up to order things sooner than later, just because with COVID, you know, so many businesses are hurting, but the nurseries, things are flying out of the greenhouses, the fields.
Yep.
And
And the
so,
demand for native plants is way up here.
yeah.
So you know, it's a wonderful thing, and it's a wonderful time to be a landscaper, but it does make life a little more challenging for those of us who want some interesting plants. But again, there are more people. Acorus restoration isn't where it used to be, but it is back in business. And also there's a company called Seedbox. Stefan Weber is involved a little bit in that. And some of these places will custom grow for you too. So be patient, but say, hey, I'm looking for some early goldenrod. What can you get me? And I think not on that list. I got to work on this list. The Guelph Arboretum plant sale as well. Not everything there is going to be native, but they have some really cool stuff like dwarf chinkapin oak, Quercus prinoides.
That's in September. So if people are looking, I think it's usually the second or third weekend in September.
I believe you're right. And all of this information is online. And if you're here, I'm pretty sure. Oh, South Coast Gardens. Well done. I still haven't made it down there. That damn virus knocked my trip. I was taking all my students there, and I was so excited that I had the excuse to go there. I was actually going to get paid to go there too. But he and I, Kevin and I, are very much on the same page on many, many ways. Origin native plants. Thank you. Thank you. Coolest
So
last
another
name ever, by the way.
question
Yep, sorry,
is
focus.
they're interested in wintergreen shrub. How do you identify male and female plants when buying?
I don't know.
Very question.
Yeah, I do not know this. Yeah, look for it in berry. That's the best way. And if there are wintergreen? No, you mean winterberry.
Winterberry.
Okay, I'm not too sure. The question is wintergreen, but it could be winterberry.
Wintergreen is a little thing, and I don't think that they are dioecious. I always have to think about that, male and female. But winterberry, Ilex verticillata, if you're going for the species, then you need to buy a bunch of them just to hedge your bets. And it probably would make a nice hedge too. Now, the alternative, the Nativar thing, is you can buy named varieties. So like Berry Poppins is the female, Mr. Poppins is the male. So you can go and buy 3 of the females and 1 of the males. And the only difference between them seems to be the berry size. The plant otherwise is pretty similar to the one as it's seen in the wild. So when we talk about nativar versus native, I'm not sure if it's a broad brush that we can paint with. Maybe a nativar winterberry is maybe even better because it's got bigger berries and it's for the birds. The flowers are the same size. So I don't know. I think maybe, well, one of the wonderful things about being Canadian is that we can argue about something to death and then go have a beer. It's okay to not all agree on this. And I'm trying to give you both sides of the coin. Anyway,
yes, another question that might be interesting, or when we could disagree with or agree or not agree, is autumn blaze maple. Is it a native plant?
So almost all of the ecologists and environmentalists I know see Freeman maple as a native. I don't know if you see many pure species Acer rubrum or Acer saccharinum silver or red maples in the wild. I see a lot of hybridizing between them, and I'm not sure if there is actually. I expect one day we're going to find that those are ecotypes, that there's no this or that, but that the ones you see over here have grown this way and the ones you see over there have grown that way. Most people would say that Freeman maple is a natural hybrid between silver and red maple. So as a natural hybrid, yes, it's native.
Okay, so another one is pink turtle heads.
Not native, but lovely.
Do they provide any benefit here?
Sure, they're great for all sorts of weird bumblebees. Only the big muscly bumblebees can get into those flowers. So yes, they absolutely are good for pollinators. If we're talking about feeding the larvae of various and sundry butterflies, but especially the Baltimore checker spot, that I do not know. I would say that it has a more leathery leaf than our native turtlehead, Chelone. So I would expect not. Although, I mean, do you see, this is where it gets weird. There's a magnolia around the corner from me that the city planted that I was sure was Magnolia acuminata, our native. And it has, I have props. It has cocoons of Promethea moth on it. And I thought that was really cool. And I posted about it and someone said, that's not that magnolia. The buds are too big. That's a cross. And here it's covered in these really cool caterpillars, well, cocoons. So, you know, it's a tough call. Oh boy. Someone's asked what to replace Vinca with. And I would say this is a good opportunity to say, check the Grow Me Instead Ontario guide. Search Grow Me Instead Ontario, and it will give you tons of better options. Now, they're not going to grow as fast, and they're not going to be as dark green right away, and they're not going to have the little purples then, but each of them has something else that's going for them, and in many ways is going to be more drought tolerant and won't screw up the environment, because that's a plant that just spills out of yards into the wild. And let's say you live in downtown Toronto, someone's going to come and say, oh, that's lovely, I want a piece of that. And it's going to end up back in the country. So I really guide people. There's no right place to plant some of these plants.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Marlene, someone requested if we could reduce the slides or eliminate the slides and put the speakers back on, up on the main slides. And while you're doing that,
Oh, I can stop share.
Oh, that's, yeah, then it's just, that's Sean's
I can
slide.
stop share.
Yes, I think that's, yeah.
Kablemo.
There you go. Now you're, so someone was wondering about, what about tropical milkweeds? Like are milkweeds, milkweeds or?
Asclepias curavasica, is it? Something close to that. And I have it. I had it. And I had seed for it. In Texas, it's a problem. In Texas, it overwinters. I've actually seen it wild in Cuba. But it gets a virus, and the virus spreads to the butterfly. Here, I think you're okay because you're not generally overwintering it. So you're starting fresh every year, and it does provide habitat. It does provide nectar. If you want something really showy, and it is really showy in a pot, then it might be something to do, or in the garden. But it's going to die in the wintertime. Like I said, I have 7 different milkweeds. I'm too much of a collector, and I'm pretty sure, well, one of them isn't native right here at any rate. I also have Asclepias speciosa, which is showy milkweed.
So someone's asked about the pros and cons of hardwood mulch in a clay soil perennial garden for weed control. What is the maximum thickness?
I guide people to 2 inches of composted mulch, which is chips or bark mixed with compost and then turned to promote biodiversity, and 2 inches. Dr. Linda Chalker Scott would say that if you are in urban soils, so where they've been messed up by building, then you should till in coarse wood chips, and then each of those wood chips is going to become a condominium for fungi and bacteria to range out from and improve your soil biodiversity. Ultimately, I would say that mulching your garden with composted mulch for the first 2 or 3 new years is good, but then I would switch to let it lay, chop and drop, if you will. And I also steal my neighbor's leaves and mulch them up. I have a little battery powered mower, and I'm bullfrog powered, so there's no carbon footprint. And I mulch them up on the boulevard and then sprinkle them in the garden. And I concentrate on, like, I think a lot about where's the soil thirsty? So I do that. And that's going to promote the soil microbiome, which is going to release the nutrients, bring up all the creepy crawlers that will make holes in the soil so the rainwater infiltrates. And that's going to promote the bacteria that nibble on the rocks and the fungi that dissolve the rocks with acid and provide complete nutrition to your garden. And then it becomes a cycle and it's easier. And when you're a lazy man, it's a better way to go.
That's a very beautiful picture. Just have you think about that. So someone's asked, what is your favorite fragrant natives? They're working on a sensory garden and want to include a good percentage of natives.
Well, absolutely. For a minute, I went blank. Oh, I don't know if they're common milkweed right away. And then there's some weird things like bayberry and sweetgale, Myricagale, that have lovely spicy foliage. Like when I'm canoeing, I got to rip them off and mangle them up. And oddly enough,
Spice bush.
yes, thank you. That's good. But also royal fern. Royal fern smells like dinosaurs. It just got this neat, spicy, woodsy smell like nothing else. And all you have to do is brush past it and it releases those. And I'm open to other ideas. Yeah, wild roses. Wild roses want to take over the world. I haven't found basswood. Does our native basswood have fragrant flowers? I've never noticed that. I know it has edible leaves. You can use them where you'd use lettuce and they're better for you.
Maybe confused with the linden.
Yeah, it could be. I that would be interesting to know. But I've started coppicing basswood in my landscapes. Like I'll put a basswood in to cut it down every year so that you get those gigantic tropical leaves because bold texture in Canadian gardens is a little rare. But then also I can eat them and they feed 149 species of Lepidoptera.
And there's
So another
the native phlox, the short one, the
Oh
woodland
yeah,
phlox.
actually several of the phloxuses are native. Phlox pedunculatus is an Ontario native. So is Stolonifera. So is subulata as well. But I've seen Stolonifera around me in Campbellville.
So someone else has asked, they are starting how should I start increasing diversity in a grassy area that we let grow wild but has little diversity? They have an area of high diversity nearby, but it hasn't transferred over.
I would think about baby stepping. So I'd do two things. I'd get some wildflower seed and I'd seed it down in the fall. Or if you really want to go gung-ho, you can get it terrace seeded, which is where they blow mulch down, the compost, and inject the seed into it as it goes. And it's a great way to get plants started. But then I would augment it with plugs, little baby plants, the smallest plants you can get. And I might, if I could plant them in September, I would plant them in September, maybe even October, depending on where you live. But failing that, springtime, as early as you can get it. And that's going to get some of the bigger, more colorful things going faster. For public pleasing, I might aim more for the flowering plants, and you can get flowering seed mixes. You can custom ask too. I expect I'll be asking either St. Williams or the folks at GANS to see how I just glossed over the pronunciation because I'm not confident about that, about getting a custom blended seed mix for me.
Yeah, that goes
so
in
that's
line
an
with
option.
what Garrett's asking right now with timing. Is it too late? Should we have already done it in the fall? Can we rush and freeze some of these seeds now? Do we still
Sure,
have
why
time?
not?
Or
Absolutely. There are recipes for each of these seeds, and you can look them up, or you can outside, out in front of my house, there are a bunch of little, what we call pan pots, which are little shallow plastic pots with compost from my composter screened in it, and then native plant seeds covered with the thickness of the seed, and I don't know if I'm doing that right, and then I've got hardware cloth over them because I have squirrels. So of all the different recipes you can use, I can let Mother Nature do it. I have had success, for instance, with common milkweed, 6 weeks in the fridge, and then 4 days in a jar of water in the fridge. And then we had nothing for 3 weeks, and it was for little kids in a school, and I was getting really nervous. And then 3 plants popped up, and then they came up sporadically over about 3 weeks after that. But native plants are tricky. They got all sorts of keys and locks that stop them from germinating easily because our climate is challenging.
So we have 2 questions regarding pawpaw trees. One is, could a pawpaw tree be put in a community garden? It's about 18.5 feet by 18.5 feet. And the other one is, how do I get my pawpaw tree to produce flowers and fruit?
Second question first, time. be patient, I would say, unless it's in too much shade. The first question, I got all excited because that's where you want to put a pawpaw, but then I found out the size of the area. The problem is that I think we're putting pawpaws in the wrong place. I know I put my pawpaws in the wrong place. Pawpaws run a lot. I was at the RBG rock garden, and every year my students get a behind the scenes sneak tour from a friend of mine who's the curator. And I was like, where are all these suckers coming from? Is that the pawpaw? He's like, yeah, they do that. They grow and they get about 15, 20 feet tall, and then mama dies and the suckers grow. And so it's not just that they sucker, it's that they grove. So we should be putting pawpaws in our parks to eat up space instead of lawn, and form, then we can grow a little meadow underneath them and so on and so on. They're not a good home garden. I'm planting them in my home garden because I want zebra swallowtails, but they're not a great home garden plant.
Yeah, I have one, and actually with answering and flowering, I got mine at the Guelph Arboretum sale, and I bought one mature, like one that was about 2 or 3 feet tall. It was 8 years when it bloomed, and the other one, because you need 2 for pollinators, like to get fruit. So the rabbits do like them. So the smaller one, it didn't get protected. So one is 8 feet tall, and the other one that should have been about 6 feet tall now is still only 3 feet tall because 2 winters the rabbits got it. So if you have pawpaw, make sure you also protect it from bunnies. Yeah, it was 8 years for bloom, the first bloom, and it's actually flies pollinated.
Really?
Yeah, it's flies. It's not bees.
Thank you. That's cool. Same with chocolate. You don't like flies, but you like chocolate. You better get over your fly phobia. And Chad has given me the information I was looking for.
I'll do it later.
It's Guyonnaceae. I don't know where to put the emphasis, but Kayanace, Guyonnaceae.
So someone has a question: is mulching necessary with native plants?
It helps in the beginning to keep moisture in and to reduce the establishment of non-native invasives. It helps. Now, having said that, I've been telling people for years and years and years, decades, mulch, mulch, mulch. And now we're telling people leave some of your garden unmulched for the ground nesting bees, which is really, really important. So I would, in fact, new gardens that I install, yes, I mulch. I use composted mulch. I put it on 2 inches thick. I bring it up from the crown of the plant and out. In fact, I put the pot over the plant, then we mulch, then we pull the pot away. So it sort of falls in at just the right level, and never pile it up against the trunk of a tree. You want it to slope up and out. There's also a great publication out there. If you search Ontario Landscape Tree Planting Guide, you'll get a fabulous, I actually was lucky enough to work on this with Landscape Ontario and Vineland Research and Innovation about how to plant trees properly. But there we go. That was a long answer.
Yeah. So a question regarding, so this is a follow-up one regarding planting exotics that are not invasive. The question now is, you mentioned in your presentation the burning bush and how it's not a native plant.
But it is invasive.
Yeah, and it's invasive, and they're wondering, okay, what's the impact? Do I pull all these plants, or do I leave them because they still provide a benefit, or do my cell going to rush out the next spring and just rip everything out?
Well, so here's the thing, and this is what it's tough to communicate to people. First of all, people, if they don't see it, they don't necessarily believe it, because we cognitive dissonance, we believe what we want to believe. We believe what agrees with us. So I like burning bush, so I don't see it moving, and so it's a good plant. It can't possibly be invasive. I have seen it. I have pulled out hundreds of them. So I can look you in the eye and tell you over time, and it does take time, but it reaches a threshold when all of a sudden it just goes. And the problem with invasives is not so much that they spread like mad, but that they push out our native species, and not just the species. So maybe you don't like tree X, but they push out all of the things that feed on those species as well. So if you think of something like buckthorn, that can become a climax species, it pushes out everything else because it fills in the area, and then our native tree acorns, for example, can't germinate and grow because it's too thick a canopy. by the way, hurts the birds, cathartic, it's a laxative. And then you have no food for anything. So all the oaks die, and the 532 species of Lepidoptera that feed on them, butterflies and caterpillars and caterpillars, there we go. Now they have nothing to feed on, and now the birds that feed on them have nothing to feed on. And it's not just the birds, it's a much bigger picture than that, right? So it's about all of the things that grow together and that feed on each other. Nature's great circle, really, tapestry. I like plants, and I have tried to rationalize certain plants. And then I go out into the wild and I see privet. Just up the street, privet and honeysuckle have taken over the local park, and the buckthorn is starting there. And these plants are, if you can live in the Amur region of the world, sort of China, Mongolia, that sort of area, you can live anywhere. And so you put them in our climate and they do. And it's so tempting, you know, well, I bet I see the bees feeding them. Don't we like to help the bees? Yeah, but the birds feed them. I thought we liked helping the birds. Yeah, but the birds feed on them, take them away and poop and fertilize them. And then they push out all our native stuff. So it's a complex and bigger picture, but sorry, the burning bush has to go.
Sorry about that. So just the pawpaw question now again, coming back up. Is there a male and female pawpaw? Do you need more than one to make the flowering?
If you want fruit, mine blooms and I only have the one blooming, but I don't get fruit because you need two to cross-pollinate for fruit. Although there's somebody from the University of Guelph, he has a single one growing in his yard, and he did a talk and he brought some in and I got to taste them, which was lovely.
Oh, they're delicious.
And so unless somebody happens to have a tree in his neighborhood that they cross-pollinate, I don't know, like he doesn't know why that anomaly, but anything you read and that you need another one unless you're going to go. I think I've seen people on native sites who lives close to me and they get a paintbrush and they'll switch pollen trees to get fruit, which sounds like a lot of work and driving, etc. But yes.
Thank you to folks, by the way, who are posting in the chat window. Sassafras Farms sells bulk seed. And someone else mentioned.
Yeah, we can go through these chats later. That'll all be saved, so Marlene and I can go through this and
cool.
pull out information. So I have a question. What native plants can grow under a black walnut tree?
Okay. I may seem like a little bit of an acolyte of Dr. Linda Chalker-Scott sometime, but she's done real research, and there is some research that says that black walnuts hurt the plants around them. There is other research that says it doesn't. Turns out it's only in a lab. We can't prove it in an outdoor setting. Mother Nature's whole thing takes care of it. The juglone does not go beyond the rhizosphere, the world around the root. Okay. So what plants grow under black walnuts? Bulletproof plants. It's more about moisture and fertility than anything else. So keeping that compost thing going there is really important. And keeping that area moist is really important. But there are lists. Weirdly enough, edible greens do really well under walnuts, which I don't understand at all. And things like zigzag goldenrod, if it's shady there, and it's not always shady under walnut because it's such a high canopy. Some of the asters like heart-leafed aster would be really good choices there. Big leaf aster.
Black raspberries, if you're looking at fruiting.
Sure, yeah, they do very well, absolutely, and they're native as well. I would say that the flowering raspberry you'd have to, all of these things you got to water them for the first year. Okay, when it's a drought tolerant plant, you got to water it for the first year. You can't forget about it. I've killed more ferns because I forget about them. I get all gappy near the end of the year. Oh, this is taken care of. The Oregon grape holly should do well there too, but still, you got to, no matter what it is, you got to get it established. Try Taxus canadensis as well. It's starting to become available. Canada U. I'm thinking it's much more bulletproof than we gave it credit for before. I've got one in my garden that I purchased this past year, and it did well even though I forgot about it. So even though it usually grows where doesn't like wet feet, but it usually has water under it in the wild, that doesn't seem to be necessary.
So native plants are seeds to plant in between flagstones. It's a dry clay soil, very sunny.
There's a plant that I just found out was native called Heal-all. Prunella is the Latin name. And it's a short-lived perennial, but it seeds down like mad. And I always thought it was a weed. So even though it always grew in between my stones, I was forever trying to weed it out but the time would do well. And I'm suddenly realized that maybe, when in Rome, or if you can't beat them, join them. And then it turns out that it is a native plant and apparently crazy medicinal as well, hence the name Heal-all. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind, because you need something that's foot traffic tolerant. So,
So maybe
what cedar grows in fairly moist soil for privacy?
cedar?
Yeah, in a very moist soil.
Okay, start small. When we're talking about woody plants, we want to buy the biggest one we can buy because I don't know how long I'm going to be around. Forget that. Plant small plants so that they adapt. I mean, many people call it a swamp cedar for a reason, and yet it can live growing out of the side of the escarpment. There is no plant more broadly tolerant of drought and wet feet and sand and clay than Thuja occidentalis, properly called Eastern arbor vitae, but nobody calls it that. It will do very well, but you got to start tiny. I might even make a little berm for them. Once they get their feet in the ground, off to the races. Same with dry soil. But you got to start small. You think a baby breaks a bone, it heals fast. My dad breaks a bone, takes forever. Me, somewhere in between. We adapt better to new conditions and to adversity when we're younger. Same is true of trees. Plant acorns, not oaks.
So someone's hoping to get our advice or thoughts. How do you get big box stores to carry natives? What can our community do? What pressure can we put on how do we get started to show that we really care about
Well, they are
natives?
actually starting to do that. They're working with Carolina in Canada, I think. There's a whole native plant package that they get. It's okay. I know the nursery that's growing them, and hey, that's something. Demand is the next answer to your question. And part of it would be to just shop where people are selling natives. Support that. The reason the box stores have anything cool is to compete to put the little guy out of business. Because they've got a business model and it works very well for them. So they try and steal business from the little guy until the little guy's not there anymore. So if you support the little guy, then that will make the box stores bring in natives. If you ask them, write to them, be loud, be on social media, tweet. And just because there's one idiot tweeting a lot doesn't mean it's not a valuable platform. If you tag Home Depot in tweets and you get a bunch of people, I mean, I got 6,000 followers on Twitter, almost. So if I say something to a targeted audience and they start sharing it, that makes Home Depot listen. If you say something about you tag other people as well, then they'll start listening. You have power nowadays. The social media, it might be a pain for some people, and it might give up a little bit of your privacy, but what you can do with it is phenomenal. And you can rally a whole bunch of people for good or ill, but that would be my advice. Shop, put your money where your mouth is, put your wallet where you want it to
Shop
support.
local, shop more small would be the kind of best option.
Loud and proud on social media. Get it out there.
Bring the list with all the Latin names and just, do you have this? Do you have this? And then just, so
I think less about asking them at the store, because that's just some poor clerk who's doing their best. But going on social media and saying, hey, how come you don't sell New Jersey tea to support this beautiful little butterfly? It's actually not that beautiful butterfly.
And then post where you can find it locally, right?
Hey, I went looking, and don't be conflict driven about it. Post, hey, I went looking for native lupins at Home Depot and I couldn't find them. But you know where I found at Home Depot, you got to tag them. But you know where I found them? At this great little nursery. And a web link, like that's an easy way to get power out there.
Absolutely. So we have two people looking at a small native shrubs. What's your recommendation for like a small native shrub?
Would depend on sun or shade. For shade, it would be um, uh, flowering raspberry. And if it were for sun, my latest favorite is Cornus emelmum, silky dogwood. I just love it. It's nice for so long. But there's lots of cool willows as well. And as I said, I've fallen in love with the idea lately because we need more bold texture in our gardens of coppicing basswood, just cutting it right to the ground every year, right to the same place. You'll see little knuckles that'll show you where to cut it back to. And that way you could have those beautiful giant edible leaves.
Okay, just.
So there's someone here, there's two.
Steph, here, just,
Marlene is.
all right, well, officially. We were
Time's up.
At 8:45, but it just also, there's still lots of people there. So Sean.
You have my undivided attention until 9 p.m.
Okay.
Okay, I'll answer quickly. And if Sean, if you want to answer concisely, we can try to get as many of these done as possible.
We
Okay.
have 9 more minutes.
Exactly. Okay. So someone's posted twice. They have a Norway maple in their backyard. It's 25 years old. What do they do now? It's
Plant a succession tree. Plant something, they don't live forever. Plant something underneath it that is going to provide that biodiversity. I'm not going to tell you to cut a tree down and release all that carbon back into the air. But plant something to take over when the Norway dies. And as the native grows, you can slowly cut away the Norway until it's time to take that down and the other tree can take over.
Love it. Okay, so someone harvested a catalpa. Yeah, seed pods. Any tips on planting?
They're not quite native here. They're brilliant for pollinators. They're native. I would call them a near native. And I'm a fan of assisted migration. They're in Pennsylvania, Ohio, New York. So I'm, again, back to the native, I think. I'm a mixed minds. Tough plant not to grow. I'd grow them. Also, dirty tree. I don't know if you want that on your property, but they're easy to grow in like a just under the plant lights, just like you grow vegetables. They germinate very easily, too easily. That was a lot of information and none of it was clear.
Are oak leaf hydrangeas native? I have them planted in dry woods in the backyard.
I think they're a near native. If you want to know for sure, oh, not quercus, hydrangea.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to know for sure, you give the botanical name and then the sharing screen, and then the letters USDA, and it will take you to a map that will show you that no, not even close. that's Tennessee there.
Okay.
So no, a lovely plant,
Okay.
but not native. I have it in my garden too. Like, don't run and
so
rip it
long.
out, but if it dies,
So
plant it
where
native.
can someone find green roof, like native plants for green roofs?
Actually, even our
That
local.
do well without watering.
The sedums. So I don't know how well they all
The
do.
sedums aren't native. If we want native plant, I would say that, well, first of all, there's a lot of engineering. I can't answer this quickly. There's a lot of engineering that goes in a green roof. If you're doing it on your shed, then you could just build a wooden box. And then I would get the natives that would suit that area. Like things like nodding onion and prairie smoke would be brilliant on a green roof. And lots of the little sedges, like Pennsylvania sedge would probably do pretty well up there. And Boudelia, Sidotes grama, aka better named mosquito grass.
Is mountain ash a native plant?
There is a Sorbus americana that is native here. Redder berries, prefers wetter feet, and it's tough to find. I think it likes it a little cooler in the summer. You'll see it up north more than you will down here, but occasionally it's available. And if you can get the berries from up there, then it would be easy to grow down here. I would just put it in dappled shade, ideally with probably wet feet, or at least near where water goes by.
Sean, can you stop the screen share on that, please?
I can.
Okay. How does Sparkberry compare to Winterberry?
Sparkleberry, back to
Oh,
the
sorry,
marketing
Sparkleberry.
thing. I think Sparkleberry is a better name than Winterberry. It's the same plant as far as I know. I've always known it as Sparkleberry, and then everybody is Sparkleberry. It's properly called Winterberry. I don't correct people about about common names because there's 8,000 different common names. It's Johnson's berry because I saw it at old Mrs. Johnson's house. Same plant,
Okay.
and both local.
What stages would you recommend converting sections of lawn to wildflowers?
Don't create more garden than you can maintain for a year. Don't create more garden in 1 year than you can maintain. So how much you do is up to you, but don't bite off more than you can weed. Otherwise you'll hate it and it'll get overgrown.
Gotcha. How old must a Kentucky coffee tree be before it flowers?
There's one around the corner from my house that's about 10 years old and it has fruit.
Okay. Would low bush blueberries and wintergreen grow under a white spruce?
Yes, if there's a sufficient moisture.
What-
I like this sort of pop quiz thing. I feel like I'm in a firing line. This is great.
4 minutes. Okay. Do you object to tilling?
If it's urban soil, I take Linda Chucker Scott's advice and I would say till in coarse wood chips. Otherwise, don't. A, unnecessary. B, it disrupts the soil microbiome. Just add organic matter on top every year.
How do you best ensure that you're growing a plant that is genetically suited to your area? Is that the same as from the website that you showed?
Yeah, get people that are harvesting local seed and growing local seed stock. And it can be really local. Like gray dogwood from down Grimsby way is a little short son of a gun. But the one that I see up here is like 3 feet taller. So sometimes the ecotypes are extremely different.
Okay. Queens and lace, lovely
Not native.
wildflower or weed?
Both. It is naturalized. It doesn't seem to hurt nature too much. Pollinators go gaga over it. So do black swallowtails. Not native. But
Okay.
it seems to play reasonably well with others. But don't let it go to seed in your garden. Sorry. It takes over the world in a regular garden.
I want to replace a Japanese maple with a pagoda dogwood, and someone warned me about the dogwood anthracnose.
The anthracnose isn't as much of a problem as golden dogwood canker is, and in which case you can just coppice it to the ground, and you'll get a multi-stem specimen growing back in its place. And Japanese maple is getting all sorts of problems too. So I'd say the odds are even.
Thoughts on composting? I know we mentioned it before, but did you have any more kind of thoughts on composting, I guess, or types of composting?
Don't compost invasive species in your home composter. Even in a municipal composter, we don't really know that that works yet, but certainly it won't work in your yard. Put your veggies and your kitchen scraps in a rolling composter like you get from Lee Valley. Lee Valley. And I only put the non-edible stuff in my 3-bin composter, but as much as I can chop and drop, that's better and easier.
Okay. What flowering native plants would you suggest for shade gardens with only 3 hours of sun?
Funny, I get to answer 2 questions at once. Someone way back a long time ago asked about native anemones. There is a native anemone, Anemone canadensis, which will do well in that situation. I also mentioned Solomon's seal and flowering raspberry. There are other native anemones that will stand rain gardens, Anemone virginiana, and prairie gardens, and I forget that one right offhand. But yeah, there we go. That was a good answer, I think.
Well, we have 1 minute left, but one of the questions I would ask that I think the general public can help answer is someone answered, how can we teach kids how to grow, eat native plants? I come from Greece and we eat a lot of native plants, wild plants. Is there any programs? They are school parent council chair. So I think, this is a great opportunity for the rest of the community to start posting stuff in the comment bar if they have answers for this. But do you have an answer?
One of my students from Six Nations, Chris Green, he was a student years ago. He's come to my class and taught my students a lot about native plants, so and what's edible and what's medicinal. So if you can get into that, like the native people know about native food and what's edible and so on. So if we're talking about native plants and eating them, that's your best route. Route. If you're talking about any plants, and for instance, there's a lady called Ellen Zakos, even though she's down in Arizona, she taught me loads about native plants. And there's lots that are great to eat. I've been eating native plants since I was a kid. Also that Forest Plants of Central Ontario and Wetland Plants of Ontario also talks about what's edible by Lone Pines Press. Forest Plants of Central Ontario.
That's good. We got it. 9 o'clock.
Thanks, gang. I love the engagement. This has been fantastic. I'm so in awe of what you all put together as far as making this happen goes.
Thank you.
And folks can feel free to reach out to me with questions as well over time.
Thank you. It's been a joy working with you, Sean. And we have a great team here with Wilmot Hort, Myth Valley Eco Boosters, Future Ground Network, and all the interest from the Facebook pages. Like it just spreads like wildflower
Wildflower seed. It spread like wildflower seed.
Spread like wildflowers, non-invasive throughout with the Facebook and that. So I think we were a little surprised. We were expecting a good sized crowd, but this was much bigger. But I think for a lot of groups, you know, this is the way of the future for a lot of our meetings as well, and to get the word out, especially with the natives. So I think, let me see on my list and just remember, I'm saying a lot, you will be getting lots of information, and this has been recorded. So assuming there's been no blips with with all the technology and that, you will be getting that. Sean's PDF of his presentation, and I've put together some lists and actually been writing like crazy, but we'll go through the chat list with some of the other names of nurseries and that. And just, I know for me, when I've gotten more into the native plants, is that Latin name, which I resist, even though I'm old enough, I took Latin in high school, actually. That, you know, I tend to go by the common name. But for instance, I know with pagoda, the dogwood, I saw the variegated one. I thought, oh my God, that's gorgeous. That's what I want. Well, it's a Chinese one. So when you're looking at go with the Latin name, then you'll know, and even and then it has this Chinese on it and that. So, but that's why the Latin names are critical. So again, thank you, everyone. Have a great night. And what do we just have? Semi-native plants here. So yeah, and if there's any more questions than that, just pass it on to all of us. So have a good night, everyone. And thank you for a great experience. Oh, and don't forget to fill out the survey. And for those, if you don't make the time when you sign off, we'll also be including the survey in the email that goes out to you. As my husband just said, survey. So, all right. Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Okay, bye-bye.